with are the first 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, the first 10 that came to mind. So this is not a complete list. I'm still adding to it, and maybe some of you will have suggestions for that. But let's quickly go through them. So lack of adequate science, we've demonstrated that that's not the case, except in the case of social sciences. And the Science Advisory Board just had a social science working group that examined progress in NOAA 5 years after on developing social science, and what we found out was we've gone from 0.7% of the NOAA budget down to 0.6% of the NOAA budget. So social sciences, when you think about it and how important they can be in fisheries management, are still the weak link. But I will say that the National Marine Fisheries Service was the place where you actually had growth in the number of FTEs. And so most of the social science that's going on in NOAA is taking place in the fisheries side of things. Okay, lack of a mandate. We talked a little bit about that. Certainly, what we didn't want to have anything that was required a mandate in getting in the way of developing a fisheries ecosystem plan, and it's not prohibited. I think Diana said it very well. Is maybe Alaska got away with doing something like this because we're far enough from the mainstream and could try out something different. But we do have a mandate to use best available science, and that's my strongest argument for why we need to further the ecosystem-based management approach. But, so we don't have this. I thank Steve Morosky for this slide, so that there is really no manual for what we're attempting. And I think that's why it's so hard at times for, say, regions to get started on this. It's a daunting task, and there aren't that many models out there to use. So you're out there on shaky ground. But there was strong support for this kind of thing. I mean, doubling the amount of funding, creating regional ocean ecosystem councils, refine the existing management system, strengthen the use of science, establish the National Ocean Council, that has happened, reorganize NOAA, that hasn't happened yet. But you can see it's a very, what they have in mind was a synthetic integrated ocean approach to ocean management. Okay, so another argument that I've heard is that good sectoral management obviates the need for an ecosystem-based approach. So that if you are not overfishing, and you could say that, or if you weren't over whaling, we might never have had a moratorium. But where you're clearly not taking care of the resources that are under your control, then you're very vulnerable to a challenge. And I think that in part was what happened in fisheries. I think we'd see a much different way to be moving ahead. We'd probably be doing some of the same things now, but moving from the traditional fisheries management, said what's wrong, we're doing okay, to an ecosystem approach, and then eventually over here. Now this is where Jake says you're not going to do it on a sector-by-sector basis, and I certainly am not going to disagree with him. But we do have sectoral management, and we have the opportunity to actually improve in each of these dimensions. Whether we can actually get someplace, there is an interesting thing. So we have lots of different things, and some of them work quite well, some of them don't. And so this Alaska Forum is a really interesting one to see who is actually doing something on the ground, who's actually making progress. Another explanation is sort of the inertia. We don't know how to do it, and we fear the unknown. I mean, fear change. These are very real issues. Who's going to be first? Alaska was first. Well, they don't know what they're doing. It doesn't necessarily mean we can do something like that somewhere else. And so what I think Diana was addressing was a process in Alaska that when we first started with the Ecosystem Committee, we had a big conference down in Seattle, and Ann and Pat organized, among others, to talk about what is ecosystem-based approach. And that brought in the fishing industry and the NGOs and managers so that into a non-threatening environment where we could just say, well, let's see how this works. And so this is the kind of thing we'd like people to be curious about new phenomena and along the lines of certain of our friends. Okay, so, but there are a lot of things. I mean, besides sort of the inertia factors, prices of inputs, I mean, many people have said we really have a difficult time funding the data, getting the data. The revenue stream is, this is not something that is necessarily going to add value in the short run. There are conflicts of many types, including the boundary conflicts that we heard about this morning. Technology, some will serve and some will solve or create problems. And we have changing human values. That's why you really need to know what humans are thinking and why social science can help. Natural disasters are clearly exacerbated by not understanding how people relate to natural disasters. And of course, we're all facing climate variability and change. So these are all big factor things that are affecting whether or not we're going to move forward with EBFM. Yesterday we had a good discussion, I thought, of what's the nature of science and how this works. And so you have sort of the two world views that sometimes it seems like where everything is overfished or everything's protected, and the reality is somewhere in between. And so. But it may be like our speaker, Dr. Cowan, was mentioning today. I mean, some of this stuff is really complex, but that's the reason why we want to actually take an ecosystem approach, because then we're asking the right kinds of questions about what's going on. So it's jurisdictionally complex. If you look at how all of these work. If you try to spread these things out in an institutional basis, which we're working on a paper on right now for Alaska, and seeing how these play out, it turns out that there really are very few players that are actually working on an ecosystem level. And I thought Don McIsaac was pointing that out very well, that the fishery management councils are a really good place to get started and take leadership. But again, they're not universally revered by all parties, and but the ecosystem is complex, and food webs are complex. The next thing is the transaction costs. I mean, what does it take in terms of time, energy, resources? I'm surprised that Don was able to say that a 2-year process involving $400,000 was going to be enough to actually be able to finish what they're working on. I would like to think that that's true, but it gets 500. Okay, 500. So with the inflation, but I mean, these are very real things. If you don't have it, is it prudent to move ahead, or can you only move ahead in the way? I mean, incrementally, very slowly, slow movement. And the transaction costs, particularly when you're dealing with an agency like NOAA and the processes through all of these things. I mean, NOAA has reorganized itself so that it now has an ecosystem goal team that's led by Steve Morosky that is, tries to bring and coordinate across the whole agency, but it's been very, very difficult. Budget-wise, this is what the budget process looks like in NOAA. So that if you want to move dollars around within the agency, you've got to go through this enormously complex process, and as we found out when we took out the earmarks, NOAA's budget has an awful lot of earmarks, and therefore has been fortunate to have just a continuing resolution and not have been stripped of the earmarks. So we've been very lucky in that respect. But there haven't been new dollars, and we've got somewhere $5 to $8 billion satellite sitting out there that needs to go up into polar orbit, and we don't have money for that, and so don't count on your GPS if that doesn't happen. So there's some major things that are going on. We can't afford it. I think there's been some good discussion about that. In terms of we haven't seen, at least in the short term, that EBFM is going to be a cost savings, but it's likely to be a cost saving in the long term. The lack of the political will, how can we show this? So the council's all ganged up and put on two shows before the Magnus Stevens Act was reauthorized, trying to garner attention to the needs and the accomplishments of fisheries management, and held these back in D.C. These are remarkable documents, and they really give a good overview of U.S. fisheries. Others have been working on the LME things. We finally got the human dimension brought in, and so that. But we still see, and I could have more recent versions of this. We still see members of the Senate, interfering with on behalf of their constituencies for, because they don't like fishery management decisions. But then, when you do something nice like the reauthorization, the president is very willing to take credit, and I think that's a good thing. So the reauthorization was just more of an encouragement rather than a real push to develop ecosystem-based management. And now we're already, some of us in this room have been involved with coming up with a more synthetic approach to be implemented across NOAA, because we're seeing needs that are greater than the fisheries management area, and so we're talking about integrated regional ecosystem assessments. And so the Science Advisory Board with Jake and others have come up with this recommendation, which NOAA is actually implementing. The West Coast pilot is sort of hung up on lack of funding right now, but we hope that in the next few years the budgets will open up and allow those kinds of things to move ahead. And so in conclusion, I'd like to say, for me, the things that I'm working on right now are, do we need an ecosystem service, sort of like what we're discussing now for a climate service? And the service would be out there testing out applications, providing help in getting started, providing a central or distributed method of disseminating information, providing training, and then what I think we see in Alaska, at least I really feel is true, is that we've created an ecosystem-based management culture that surrounds fisheries. It doesn't mean we do everything right in the ecosystem, but at least that's a conscious part of whether you're in the industry, whether you're in academia, serving on the SSC, or in a management role. So with that, what can we expect in the next 10 years? Chaos. I think evolution toward a revolution is what the way I'd like to phrase it. Should we be doing things like developing ensemble forecasts for ecosystems? I mean, that'd be really cool. And we'll get increasingly comprehensive prospects. But this is where I think it really is. Folks, move over. We've got a new generation coming in, and they're going to do the job better than we have. So thank you.
Time for questions? I was actually talking to Jason this morning a little bit about this, but given that in some of the ecosystem boundaries we have an enormous disparity of wealth of nations that may need to contribute to sort of an ecosystem-based approach, how can we solve that problem? I mean, is it going to be, we're going to have something kind of like the IMF for ecosystems where there will be, even if there's a sort of a minimal data requirement necessary to do ecosystem-based management, there are going to be some countries within the boundaries of or along the boundaries of the system that can't afford to collect the data. How are we going to deal with that problem from a financial standpoint?
I think I go back to sort of the area that Jake was trying to point us in terms of the international, the Convention on Biological Diversity and some of these other things. They actually have some financial support for that. I mean, one of my students did a study of implementation of the CBD in small island developing states, and what she found was most of them don't have a chance of actually filling in the forms that you're supposed to do every 3 years, and the only ones that did were former French colonies who had French scientists platooned out to help them do that. So you've got a very real set of issues, but I think it's going to be working out of FAO. It's going to be working out of World Bank with the GEF. I mean, I think there are ways that this can happen, but maybe your idea of IMF.
Well, that was actually, I credit that to Jason. He was the one who actually used the term, but it is a concern that I think is a very real one, is because it costs money to collect data and manage fisheries. Right, and the other groups, I mean, the group that's really stepped forward now are the NGOs and the foundations have really taken the lead in providing dollars and personnel and training and all these different kinds in lieu of this. Yeah, Jake.
Just really quickly on this point. 2 weeks ago, the group of experts doing the assessment of assessments for the United Nations tabled their report to the Ad Hoc Steering Committee of the UN, which lays out a detailed proposal including costs, funding sources, and capacity building to undertake periodic global and regional assessments integrated across full ecosystems, social, economic, and ecological dimensions. That report will be available online at IOC and UNEP by